The town of Red Hollow gathered like it always did when blood was promised. Men leaned against wooden posts, women watched from windows, and the rope creaked softly in the morning wind as if already impatient. On the platform stood a young woman named Eliza Crowfoot. Her hands bound her face marked with dust and bruises, yet her back straight and unbroken. She was half Cheyenne, taken weeks earlier after a raid she did not lead and a fire she did not start. The sheriff read charges with a bored voice: theft, murder, rebellion, words that tasted false in the air. Eliza listened quietly, knowing that truth had no weight in places like this. She had survived winters, starvation, loss, and war, but this moment felt different, not because she feared death, but because she feared being forgotten. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the sun on her face and the ground beneath her boots, memorizing the world one last time. Around her the town waited, hungry for an ending. At the edge of the crowd stood Jonah Reed, a man shaped by the frontier and worn by regret. He had ridden into Red Hollow at dawn, planning only to rest his horse and buy supplies before moving on. He had not expected to find the hanging nor the woman at its center. Something in her stillness stopped him, the way she did not beg or cry, the way she met the crowd with quiet defiance. Jonah had seen many people die, some guilty, some innocent, and the difference always lived in the eyes. Eliza's eyes held no shame, only exhaustion and pride. He listened as the sheriff spoke lies with practiced ease, and he felt anger rise slow and dangerous. Jonah was not a hero, and he had learned long ago that standing against a town rarely ended well. Still, he could not turn away. When the sheriff asked if anyone had reason to stop the execution, silence fell heavy and final. Jonah felt the weight of choice press down on him harder than any rifle. He stepped forward. The murmurs spread quickly, shock turning to anger as Jonah spoke. He said the woman was no murderer, that the real raiders had ridden south weeks ago, and that he had tracked them himself. The sheriff laughed and asked who Jonah thought he was. Jonah answered simply that he was a man who had seen enough injustice to last a lifetime. The crowd shifted, uncertain, some recognizing the truth in his words, others clinging to the comfort of violence. The sheriff ordered Jonah to step back and reach for his gun. Time slowed. Jonah moved faster. The shot rang out, echoing across the square, and the sheriff fell stunned, not dead but bleeding. Chaos erupted. Jonah cut Eliza free and pulled her from the platform as bullets struck wood and dust exploded around them. They ran through alleys and past, shouting, men, hearts pounding, feet flying, driven by instinct and desperation. At the edge of town, Jonah had horses waiting, because some men always prepared for trouble. He lifted Eliza onto the saddle, and they rode hard into the open land, leaving Red Hollow choking on its own rage. They did not stop until the sun dipped low and the land grew quiet again. Eliza slid from the horse, shaking not from fear but release. Jonah watched her carefully, keeping distance, letting her breathe. She turned to him, eyes sharp and searching, asking why he had risked his life for a stranger. Jonah answered honestly, saying he did not know her, but he knew the lie they meant to kill her with, and he could not let that stand. Eliza studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if accepting a truth deeper than words. She told him her name and her story of being taken and accused, and how she had accepted death because fighting alone felt useless. Jonah listened, feeling something shift inside him, something dangerous and hopeful. As night fell, they built a small fire and shared food in silence, both aware that nothing about this choice could be undone. The days that followed bound them together through necessity and trust. They traveled north, avoiding towns, sleeping under stars, and sharing stories when the fire burned low. Eliza spoke of her people, of songs and spirits, and of the ache of being caught between worlds. Jonah spoke of war, of loss, and of riding west to escape ghosts that followed anyway. Attraction grew quietly in shared glances and unspoken understanding, neither daring to name it. Jonah knew that protecting her would bring hunters and blood. Eliza knew that staying with him meant stepping into a life built on danger. Yet when Jonah offered to part ways once she reached safety, Eliza surprised them both by refusing. She said she had spent too long being pushed by fear and lies, and that this time she would choose her own road. Under the endless western sky, two lives crossed not by fate alone, but by courage, and the first thread of love began to weave itself into a legend that the frontier would not forget. Morning came pale and cold, with mist rising from the low ground, as Jonah and Eliza broke camp without speaking much. The danger of pursuit hung over them like a second sky, and both understood that silence was safer than plans spoken aloud. They rode north through broken land where rocks cut the earth and old trails twisted away into nothing. Jonah chose paths that avoided water and towns, trusting instinct earned through years of running from one thing or another. Eliza watched him closely, noticing how he read the land like a book, how his body stayed loose yet ready, how his eyes never rested. She had known warriors and hunters all her life, but Jonah was different, shaped by loss rather than pride. As the sun climbed, they stopped near a stand of cottonwood trees and watered the horses. Eliza moved with more ease now, strength returning to her limbs, yet the memory of the rope still lived in her shoulders. Jonah offered food, and she accepted without ceremony. They spoke then not of danger, but of names of places, of how the land changed when seasons turned. It was easier to talk around the truth than directly into it. Still, each word laid another stone between them, forming a bridge neither had planned to cross. By the second night, Jonah admitted what both already knew, that men would follow them, not only the sheriff's friends, but bounty hunters drawn by rumor and money. Eliza listened calmly, then asked him if he regretted stopping the hanging. Jonah answered without hesitation that he would regret it only if he had done nothing. The honesty settled something in her chest, warm and painful at once. She told him that among her people actions mattered more than promises, and that he had already proven himself by choosing risk over comfort. Jonah did not know how to answer that, so he fed the fire and let silence speak for him. As stars filled the sky, Eliza sang softly a song her mother had taught her, one meant to call strength back into the body. Jonah listened, leaning against his saddle, feeling something inside him loosen for the first time in years. The song did not ask for mercy or victory, only endurance. When it ended, neither spoke, but the space between them felt changed, filled with shared breath and quiet respect. The next days tested them harder. They spotted riders twice and were forced to detour through harsh ground where water ran thin and sleep came light. Eliza proved herself again and again, riding long hours without complaint, scouting ahead and reading signs Jonah missed. Once she warned him of an ambush just in time, and they slipped away unseen. Trust grew sharper, now edged by survival. One evening after a close escape, Jonah lost his temper, cursing the world that would not let them be. Eliza faced him steady and told him anger wasted breath, better used to keep moving. Jonah realized then that she was not someone he was protecting, but someone standing beside him, equal in risk and resolve. That understanding changed how he looked at her, how he spoke, how he listened. Later that night, as they shared a blanket against the cold, Jonah felt her shift closer, and neither pulled away. It was not desire that moved them first, but comfort, the simple need to feel another heartbeat nearby in a land that often swallowed people whole. When rain finally came, it trapped them in a narrow ravine, forcing them to shelter under rock as water rushed past. They were soaked cold and laughing breathless at the foolishness of it all. Jonah built a fire with care, shielding it from the wind, and Eliza helped wring water from their clothes. In the close space, words came easier. Eliza spoke of the day her father died and of the anger that had followed her since. Jonah spoke of the man he had been before the war and the one he could never fully become again. The rain drummed above them, steady and relentless, as if urging honesty. Jonah admitted he did not know where he belonged anymore, only that moving kept the ghosts quieter. Eliza told him that belonging was not always a place, sometimes it was a person who saw you clearly. The words hung between them, fragile and brave. Jonah reached for her hand, slowly giving her time to pull away. She did not. Their fingers laced, tentative at first, then sure. It was a promise neither named, yet both understood. When the rain eased, they did not rush to leave. Jonah looked at Eliza and saw not the woman on the platform, but someone fierce and alive, choosing him as much as he was choosing her. Eliza saw in Jonah not a savior, but a man willing to stand alone if justice demanded it. They kissed then softly, unsure and real, tasting of rain and smoke and relief. It was not a beginning born of ease, but of survival and shared danger, and it bound them deeper than either expected. Later, as they rode on, the world felt different, not safer but fuller. Yet the West does not allow peace to last without cost. That night, Jonah found fresh tracks, too many, too close, and knew the reckoning was coming. Eliza felt it too, and did not flinch. She told him whatever happened, she would face it with him, not because she owed him, but because she chose him. Under the wide, restless sky, two paths had become one, and the road ahead promised blood, fire, and truth, and love strong enough to demand everything. The riders found them at dawn, just as the land turned gold beneath the rising sun. Jonah saw the dust first, low and spreading, carried by hooves that did not bother to hide. There would be no running now, not with tired horses and open ground ahead. Eliza felt the shift in Jonah before he spoke, and she nodded, already knowing. They moved together with practiced calm, choosing higher ground where rocks broke the line of sight and the wind carried sound away. Jonah checked his rifle steady, despite the fear pressing at his chest. Eliza gathered stones and chose her knife, eyes sharp and unafraid. They did not speak of escape or sacrifice, because both understood this moment had been coming since Red Hollow. When the riders crested the rise, there were 6 men, armed, confident, and smiling like predators certain of their prize. The leader called out, offering Jonah a chance to walk away, promising reward and forgiveness if he handed Eliza over. Jonah answered by stepping forward, placing himself fully between the men and the woman he loved. His voice carried clear and firm, saying there would be no bargain today. The men laughed and spread out, believing numbers would win the day. The West often teaches that lesson until it does not. The fight erupted fast and brutal, echoing across the stones. Jonah fired first, dropping one rider before the others could react. Eliza moved like shadow and fire, using the land as weapon and shield. Shots rang out, dust exploded, and the air filled with shouts and pain. One man rushed too close, and Eliza struck without hesitation, ending the threat with fierce precision. Jonah took a bullet across the shoulder and nearly fell, but Eliza was there, steadying him, pulling him back behind cover. Blood soaked his sleeve, yet his eyes never left the field. Together, they fought not as hunter and protected, but as equals bound by trust. When it ended, 3 men lay dead, and the rest fled, dragging their wounded and curses behind them. Silence returned, heavy and final, broken only by Jonah's labored breathing. Eliza pressed cloth to his wound, hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. She whispered his name again and again, grounding him until the bleeding slowed and the danger passed. They stayed hidden until nightfall, knowing survivors would spread word. Jonah's injury burned, but he endured it with quiet grit, refusing to slow them more than necessary. Eliza led them through narrow paths known only to her people, guiding them toward a remote valley where the land folded in on itself like a secret. Along the way, Jonah apologized for the danger his choice had brought her. Eliza stopped him, placing her hand against his chest, and told him danger had followed her all her life, and that choosing him had been the first thing that felt truly free. The words cut through his pain sharper than any blade. When they reached the valley, stars had already begun to appear, scattered bright across the darkening sky. They built a fire, small and hidden, and shared water in silence. Jonah slept fitfully fevered, and Eliza stayed awake, watching over him the way her mother once watched over warriors returned from battle. In that quiet, she understood that love in the West was not gentle, but it was honest, and that honesty demanded courage every single day. Jonah woke before dawn, pain sharp but manageable. Eliza helped him sit and fed him slowly until strength returned to his eyes. They spoke then of what came next, not with fear but clarity. Jonah said the hunters would not stop, that their legend would grow twisted and dangerous. Eliza listened and answered that legends could protect as much as they could destroy, and that sometimes becoming a story kept people at bay. She spoke of a place far north where her people still gathered seasonally, a land rough enough to discourage pursuit. Jonah considered the road and knew it would be hard but not impossible. He admitted that staying alive had never been his only goal, and that walking beside her gave meaning to the miles ahead. Eliza smiled, then soft and rare, and kissed him again, this time without hesitation. It was a promise spoken without words, carried by breath and warmth beneath the open sky. They traveled north for weeks, moving carefully, avoiding towns and known trails. Word followed them anyway, whispered and exaggerated, until Jonah became a gunslinger and Eliza a ghost who struck like lightning. The truth mattered less than the fear, and that fear bought them space. Along the way they helped a stranded family, fixed a broken wagon, and shared food with those who asked without greed. Slowly the land began to change, hills rising green and rivers cutting deep paths through stone. One evening they reached the edge of the valley Eliza had spoken of, and looked out over a place that felt untouched and waiting. Jonah felt a weight lift from his chest, realizing that for the first time in years, he was not running from something, but toward it. Eliza felt the same certainty settle into her bones. As they rode down into the valley, the past loosened its grip, not erased, but carried differently. Jonah knew the world would never be safe, and Eliza knew peace was never permanent. Still they chose each other in full awareness of the cost. In time, stories would spread of a Cheyenne woman who escaped the noose and a cowboy who defied a town for her sake. Some would call it foolish, others heroic, but those words would never touch the truth of it. The truth lived in small moments, shared by firelight, in hands reaching without fear, and in the choice made again each morning to stand together. The West tried to take everything from them: land, life, identity, and love. What it failed to take became legend, not because it was perfect, but because it endured.